Thank you. Well, we're here to talk about solutions. These are not just solutions about fish. They're about our human communities. I work for what is arguably a fish and wildlife agency, and I've worked in this field since the 1970s. Very early in my career, I had a mentor who tried to impress upon me, you can't do much for fish and wildlife if you can't work with people. And that's something I'm not sure I've always been successful at, but it's something I've always tried to consider, at least through my career. I want to talk briefly about realities here. And I will ask you to hold the slides for just a second. Oh, okay, I have the pointer. The status of fish in this basin is not good. We don't fully understand many of the factors that influence populations. We can't substantially influence many of the factors that do influence fish, notably the oceans. Some of those we can influence. Those, I think, are embodied in habitat and in harvest. Under habitat, we can influence water quality and water quantity and substrate. But I think that part of this business about solutions and part of maintaining our human relationships working with each other is helping each other to understand the realities and being very candid about the complexities and being candid about things we don't understand that affect the limitations of our efforts. That's 2005 data on fall Chinook in the Klamath Basin. Can you see the right-hand corner here? That's the Trinity River, which is showing a little more stability. The Shasta River. Note the fluctuations here, but here again at this stage, we're at a very low level. Did I miss one there? Oh, yeah, the Scott. This is not good. At the same time, there are a lot of the responses here that we can't claim to understand and that are, from a biological standpoint, are intriguing, but from a policy standpoint are kind of confounding. This is data, it's a little bit old right now. This was some analysis done in 1999 by scientists from the National Marine Fisheries Service. And I'll take a second to explain it. Along the bottom axis, this is the number of Chinook, fall Chinook spawners in thousands, and these are the thousands here. And this axis is essentially the number of progeny from this group that returned 4 years later. Now, a couple things I would note here. There's this group here in which fairly small runs resulted in fairly small resulting recruitment. But there's this group up here, which resulted, this was small runs of fish, which 4 years later resulted in large recruitments. Out here on this scale, we don't really see the same sort of pattern. In these much larger runs, the amount of recruitment has not been substantially higher. Now, we could go on probably for hours in conjecture about why these things might be. Here there was obviously some fortunate convergence of events, whether it was lack of competition, whether it was good river conditions, whether it was good ocean conditions, whether, et cetera, et cetera. We don't really know those things, and it's certainly subject to more analysis. But this is one of those things that I think we have to be candid about this is the statistical line through this data, and it essentially suggests that the maximum probability of recruitment comes down in these size classes. Now, I want to raise one point. 2002, when in the different terminology, the die-off, the mortality event, 30 to 60,000 fish, depending on the method of estimation, died, but there were 65,000 natural spawners that survived that. So that year of spawning was in here. Now, that year is not subject to these analyses that came later. But it would suggest that we would have expected a progeny up in here. Not the zero virtually, since we're below 30,000 progeny for this year, at least in the projection line. We're about to find out what we really got. But my point is that to make statements that the 2002 mortality event was responsible for the low return this year are not borne out by these data. And this is just one example. It's really easy to try to oversimplify in an effort to explain a system that we really don't understand very well. And I think that one of the most important things that we can do in the maintenance of our human relationship here, in working together for fish and wildlife, is to be candid about the complexities and about the things we don't understand. The basic assumption I think that you folks are working on here who are attending is that it is a reasonable assumption that the improvement of habitat will improve fish numbers and that will improve the status of human communities. I think that is a very reasonable assumption, and I think we should keep doing it. Keep records, monitor, learn from those records, share our results, adjust our methods, keep doing it. But let's remain honest in our expectations and in our, I think, an admission that we don't understand all the complexities of the systems that we're working with here. Funds are going to be limited to some extent. That's going to require prioritization, and it's going to require accountability. Marshall presented one strategy for prioritization. You'll probably hear some more of this afternoon. I had the distinct pleasure of supervising the administrative functions of the Klamath Task Force for the last 5 years, and that included an audit by the Government Accountability Office. We will always have to be accountable for the taxpayers' funds that we're spending. That's the right thing to do. But just another one of those realities is that process of being accountable in itself costs money. There were concerns among the Klamath Task Force and the Klamath Fishery Management Council about the amount that was being spent on overhead. Justified concern. Lo and behold, the accountability, the GAO said, you need to be doing more to provide accountability. That would have increased overhead costs. We have to recognize, I think, one of these little hard realities is that overhead costs and maintenance of accountability is always going to be something of a burden on our process. I'll wrap up. I don't know how many of you noticed, after Troy spoke and while Paula was speaking, Troy was just involved in this shameless bit of trying to get me to alter my talk here. It was like a government to government consultation. But I will. No, it did. I'll grant you this much. That phrase that I opened with, I have revised. You can't do much for this basin if you can't work with your relatives. Thank you.